Canterbury's skyline, with its towering cathedral, is set to become even more iconic as the remodelled Marlowe Theatre takes shape. The new building will have its own tower, mirroring that of the home of the Church of England, a secular complement to the spiritual. The man behind this grand design is award-winning architect Keith Williams, who is passionate about bringing inspiration to members of the public via his buildings. So why does the Marlowe Theatre actually need to be redeveloped?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, firstly, you only have to look at the demand for the shows that go on here. The Marlowe plays to something approaching 300,000 people per annum. The catchment from which it draws its audience, might number as many as 1 million people. So, it has a sort of pivotal role to play in supplying, high quality theatre to its audience. But it's important that it has a robust, not only artistic base, but actual building base from which to operate. Now, this building that we're currently standing in was a 1930s cinema. It was converted around about 1982, almost as an emergency measure to keep the Marlowe going. Its old premises, its old theatre was being demolished, and a very valuable kind of rescue job it was indeed. But in a sense, to keep this building going, even as it is, would require very substantial investment, and figures are being worked on at the moment. But this current building falls far short of modern standards in so many ways, not least accessibility, and so on and so forth, which really doesn't come anywhere near modern standards. So the way is open, I think, to use the money that would need to be spent in any case on the building, to use that as sort of seed capital, very substantial seed capital, to look to raise money from both the private sector and from other public sector agencies to ensure that Canterbury, this sort of incredibly famous, world famous city, finally has a theatre building which is worthy of its architectural heritage.
Your work has been described as visionary. What is it you actually try to bring to a building?
Well, I think architecture is always a kind of a difficult mix of the fundamentally practical. You need so many square meters to carry out this or that function. But actually, there always needs to be some kind of essence of the human soul in architecture too. We all know what I mean when we visit some of the great buildings that the cathedrals, perhaps the Parliament buildings in extremis. So I suppose what we try to do is to work, and I work a lot in historic cities, but I don't do historic buildings. I do contemporary buildings, which perhaps glean something from the site-specific nature of their location, and something which celebrates the way people interact with buildings, the way they move through them, the way they stop and pause, and the way we bring light into buildings, the way material can shape the experiences of people who inhabit the buildings internally and those who view them externally. So it's a difficult thing to be terribly precise about. It is both intuitive and robust and practical, and it is that mix, I think, that provides the essence of the way we work.
Can you just give us some example of recent projects you've been involved in?
Sure. Well, we're working on, we're doing quite a lot of work, or have done, and are continuing to do a lot of work in the Republic of Ireland. We're currently building the new opera house for Wexford, which is a world-famous opera festival. Many people will be aware of that. We're working on a new museum in Chichester, which we're floating above, proposing to float above, extant remains of a former Roman bath. So that has its own sort of challenges. And Chichester, like Canterbury, is obviously a very historic place with a fine cathedral. So there are many sort of parallels, and we work in many other places too. But I guess our main specialism is in public and public buildings and buildings for the arts. And so Canterbury the new Marlowe Theatre, we'll realise, will probably, I think, be our 4th or 5th theatre. So there's perhaps an opportunity to bring some of our past expertise onto this building. But of course, every project we do is unique, and so when finished, I'm absolutely sure that the new Marlowe will be unique.
So can we have a look at some of these new designs?
Sure. Firstly, I think it's important to say, what we're trying to do. I mean, the existing theatre was a conversion from a 1930s cinema, and it was converted almost as an emergency measure in the early 1980s, so that the Marlowe as an institution could continue. Its then home was being demolished. Fantastic rescue effort, but obviously 25 years on, then obviously the building is now beginning to show its age and really falls far short of what I think a city like Canterbury should expect from its kind of most important, or one of its most important cultural buildings. So what we're trying to do, or what we're proposing to do, is a number of things. Firstly, to increase the seating capacity of the auditorium, of the main auditorium, by 25%. So that'll take it from about 950, which is currently what it is, up toward the 1200 mark, so very significant uplift. We're going to add a new second theatre, 150 seats, that doesn't exist at the moment, and add in new foyers, new bars, and all the backstage facilities that the theatre staff and visiting acting companies would expect. Now, clearly that's pretty far-reaching proposal, and to achieve that we're actually going to need to demolish most of the existing buildings, sweep away what is there, front of the proscenium, keep the flying tower, reclad it, remodel it, and in essence build a new building in the position of the current auditorium and foyer. So that's what we're going to do, or what we're proposing to do. What does that look like? Well, we've already talked a little about the fly tower and how we might remodel that and turn it from, as we can see here, a lumpen, fairly ugly object into a much more elegant soaring structure. And in this image you can see the pinnacle, which we see clad in a kind of a shimmering stainless steel mesh, so that it both helps define the shape but also to soften and dematerialize, so the pinnacle becomes in certain lights very significant, in other lights starts to dissolve into the sky. As I've said, new second space, and that is in the current design proposals elevated above the foyer, so the foyer slides along beneath it and forms a sort of continuous, if you like, shop window to the Friars and the riverbank, uniting all of those within a kind of harmonious architecture. And that perhaps is also evidenced from the approach from St. Peter Street down the Friars, moving sort of northeasterly toward the riverbank. So what you'll see here is a colonnade, a new colonnade, which takes the approximate scale of the buildings opposite, so that it gives a street character. But on the one hand, but obviously it's a very contemporary architectural language, and I think that's right. The existing building looks very much like a 30s building. It feels quite fun. It feels quite seaside in a way, slightly out of place, I'd say, in the centre. So what we want to do is to offer a very contemporary building, but one which is respectful of the scale and the materials of the environment in which it finds itself. So it's a forward-looking building. It just has a look over its shoulder to the past.
What about the sight lines for people when they're inside the theatre?
Now that's interesting. I mean, the sight lines from the existing theatre are actually pretty good, but particularly when you move toward the back of the auditorium, you find yourself a very long way away from the stage. There isn't probably a great sense of intimacy, in other words, a connection with the stage, which you might find in many other theatres. And it's interesting that the furthest seat from the stage edge is about 35 metres, so what's that, 115 feet or 120 feet probably in old money, perhaps even a touch more, and that in a capacity of 900, 950. What we're proposing to do, as you can see from these diagrams, is to introduce two balconies. The advantage of that is that it begins to bring people much closer to the stage. So nobody will be more than about 25 metres from the stage, i.e. 1/3 closer to the stage, which must be a good thing in terms of the audience experience and of course the actors' experience, because actors and performers don't always, unless they're kind of playing stadium rock or whatever, they like to be able to have some connection with the entirety of their audience. So we're aiming for a new theatre which has an significantly increased capacity, 25%, as I've said, over the current seating arrangements, but everyone's much closer, which is a kind of an interesting trick to pull off, but we're confident we can achieve that.
Keith, thank you very much.